Today I want to talk about a really powerful question. Is that 100% true? Because if it's not, then it's not a fact. It's a choice. It's something that I choose to believe. And this is not really a problem until my belief is holding me back from something that I'm trying to do or making me feel a way that I don't want to feel. And I think I'm obligated to it. I think it's just the facts in my life that are making me feel that way. But really, it's a sequence of choices that I've been making over the last 30 years. And after I made the choices, I just sort of moved on from them and didn't question them again and just assumed they were facts. Now, I've said stuff like this many times, and I'll admit I do like to stir up trouble on Facebook with questions along this line, sort of questioning truths and what we believe are facts. And generally, people get upset about what I'm trying to say about masks or COVID or vaccines. And first of all, I'd like to say I'm not talking about masks or COVIDs or vaccines. Well, maybe that one time I was. But most of the time, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something entirely different. I love science. I just also love mindset. And so if I go back and I look at some science, if I look back at my physics class where Mr. Quinton was teaching me, it was very annoying at the time, but he required us to do our homework in a very certain way. We had to write the problem and then write our assumptions and then begin our calculations at how we were going to reach our answer in that problem. And in high school, I just thought that was super annoying. I'm like, why do I need to always write these assumptions? I do just write the same ones all the time, hope he wouldn't look too closely, that my calculations would be correct, and that's all he would care about. But it turns out the assumptions are really important. Because I don't know if you do this, but in that physics class that you maybe took in high school, there was a section called projectile motion, where you took a look at shooting things out of a cannon and it went this high and what's the maximum height it reached and how far did it go, what was its initial velocity and all that stuff. None of it was accurate because all of it ignored air resistance. It all just ignored that. That was one of the assumptions that you write down. And you're like, well, but if I'm shooting a cannonball through the air, how important could air resistance really be? Well, if you take a look at things like tornadoes, or that air resistance can hold 100,000 pounds up in the air while it's flying from Los Angeles to Hawaii, it's a pretty big deal. Air resistance is a pretty big deal. And so it's interesting that you could go through all those calculations, you could do it all right, you could be very confident in your logic, and you got all of this evidence and all of this step-by-step that if someone said, I don't think your conclusion is right. You're like, no, look at my calculations. They're beautiful, they're flawless. But the problem was not with your calculations. Your logic may be really good, but there could be an underlying assumption that is still leading you to an improper outcome. If you're looking at where do I put the swimming pool if I'm going to launch this human being out of a cannon and have them hit the water, if you're ignoring air resistance, you've got a problem. And so the way that shows up in mindset work is that I may meet someone who really, really wants to start a business. They've got this idea that they want to come out of them. But they're kind of older. They're already in their 30s and they've got a family and their family has kids and the kids go to the doctor and they've got a husband or a wife and they go to the doctor. And the family is sort of they got this story about the family depending on them bringing in the money. And maybe it's true, maybe the family does depend on it. And so they feel they've got a story that's very responsible to be safe, to be cautious about this, to uphold this security. And they could be right. I'm checking all the calculations. These are solid calculations. This is someone that's kind of got it figured out. But there's an assumption underneath all of that that's just assumed to be true, that the entrepreneur journey, that starting your own business is risky, and that being a 9-to-5 employee is not risky. That's an interesting assumption because you could look back and you could say, well, sometimes people actually do get fired from their 9-to-5 job though. And so then where did that safety go? And sometimes people that take on an entrepreneur journey, they actually set themselves up in such a way that they have more time with family. It's like more security in terms of the family's health, mental health, their connection as they move forward. And it's not to say the other way is wrong. It's not. There's definitely security in a 9-to-5 job, but it's not 100% true. And so then when you see it's not 100% true, then you start to realize like, oh, wow, I've been sort of building my entire logical framework, my entire sort of boundaries of what is possible or impossible, what is realistic or unrealistic, what is safe or what is dangerous. I've been building it on an assumption that has gone unchecked this whole time. And so what I like to think of it as is my inner middle school kid. I just imagine someone that's like 12, 13. I don't know if you've ever worked with kids like this or hung out with kids like this, but they challenge everything. Oh yeah? Well, what about? Oh yeah? Well, what about? That's a very good mentality. Bringing out my 12-year-old Jake is a really good way to find out where something is not 100% true. So that person is like, oh yeah, 9-to-5 job is safe, this and that. And it's not that it changes everything, and it's not that it makes life easy, but what it does is it provides options. You get to see where you're choosing. And now you've got your authority back in this scenario rather than thinking that you're a victim, which is the story that you're telling. I'm a victim of my age, my family, the situation I've built, and my options are limited because I must take this action. No, not must, I'm choosing to take this action. And even when that choice is revealed, you may continue to, taking the same action. It's not that you have to change it just because you learn that it's a choice. But it's good to know that it's a choice and to be able to see where your authority and your agency lies in your own life. Another example that comes up is someone, say, I talked to someone whose sister is on drugs. And so they're living in anxiety. Or even worse, a parent whose child is on drugs. The anxiety, through the roof. And we're looking at like, they're like, I don't want this life experience. I'm limited in what I can do, the actions I can take, the connection I can have with my kid because of this anxiety. But the anxiety it's real. It's not optional. It's there because taking drugs could kill my child or my sister, whatever you want to do. And so there's the assumption, right? Back in the physics class, writing the assumptions. But what does the middle school kid say in this scenario? Like maybe drugs would kill your kid, or maybe your kid would get hit by a bus. Maybe they get shot in a mugging. Maybe they'd go rock climbing and fall off the cliff. There are lots of ways. And so all that does is it kind of opens up the field of view. Because then if I put myself in the shoes of that mom or dad or whatever, someone who's got a sister that's in trouble, I start thinking, oh, that's interesting because I've got other kids also. They may get hit by a bus or fall off a cliff when they're rock climbing, but I don't spend all my time thinking about that. Every time I see that kid, I don't think, oh, hi, gosh, you may die. Boom, anxiety, comes through the roof. Whereas the kid that I know is using drugs, even if I see them and they're like, oh, hey, dad, I'm like, I got to get them off drugs. Boom, all I'm thinking about is drugs and anxiety is coming to the surface. And so I'm not connecting with them. If I look at where that leads me, this anxiety is leading me to postpone my connection of them, postpone my love for them, postpone the time where I'm saying like, hey, you're a wonderful person and thinking good thoughts about them. I'm postponing that until they get off the drugs. First thing I've got to do is get them off drugs. I've got to get them in rehab. I got to do something. I got to shake them. I got to wake them up. And so I am the one that is taking away all of the connection, the love, the relationship. And interestingly enough, all the while thinking that I don't want them to die because then I won't have this relationship. Like I'll miss out on all of it. And my obsession with that is actually causing me to miss out on that in this scenario. Just another example where I could say, oh, is that 100% true? Am I really obligated to the reality I've created that's limiting the solutions that are available to me? Well, it may sound like a stretch, and I'm not saying everyone needs to go high-fiving their kids if they're on drugs. You can want to do better, but the question you have to ask yourself is that if you chose to love, if you chose to connect, if you chose to stop thinking about the drugs all the time, you chose to sort of give up your thought drug addiction in this scenario, how would you show up differently? What solutions might be available to you? How would you be in this relationship? And would that be a superior performance than the performance that you're putting out there right now? Would you increase your performance potential by sort of shifting the way you think about this and getting yourself into a different mindset? Now, does that take courage? Of course it does. And we could do a whole nother video on that. There's tons about that in Trust You. It's actually one of my favorite topics, is how do you go about doing that? How do you go about, doing the courageous work of sort of leaving behind the story that you really think is keeping you safe? Because if I watch for danger, then I'll be prepared. And how do you go into the thought process, the mentality that actually helps you show up the best in the present that might actually prevent more danger down the road? It's awesome. One of my favorite things to talk about. As far as this video, I'm just going to tell you it can be done. There's a way to do that. And to offer proof, in case you're still a skeptic, this is what I want to offer. I'm in a marriage right now. I'm married to Whitney. I love Whitney. And if you were to ask me, Jake, does your marriage last? I'm going to say 100% yes, it does. My marriage lasts. And it's easy for me to grab. I 100% believe that it will. I act as if it's going to. That's also a choice that I'm making. I'm aware of that. It's an assumption that I'm taking on. It is not 100% true. It's not. And as soon as it's not 100% true, then it's a choice. And so this is a really good example of where I know I'm making a choice, but I'm going to continue making that choice. Why? Because it's fact? No. Because it's right? No. Because it's true? No. Because it is my access to showing up as the best husband I can be today. It serves me. That is the only qualification that I'm going to use for whether or not I decide to make this choice. So I really wanted to offer that, 3 sort of examples, because I know I'm on this soapbox all the time, saying that it's a choice, you're not obligated, you get to believe what you want. And I do think it's funny, but it's not my point to be talking about masks and vaccines. It really is not what I'm talking about when I say that stuff. But I do find it hilarious when it goes that direction on Facebook. What I'm really talking about is the stories that are limiting you, that are holding you back. The stories that you fight for, just like you would for a mask or a vaccine opinion. You fight for those stories, you fight for those excuses, and the problem is that if you fight for those excuses, you get to keep them. They do become real because you're choosing them over and over and over again. So this is what I want to offer you. Take a look at what's going on in your brain. And the best way I know to do that is to just set a timer on your phone for 5 minutes and get a paper and a pen and start writing down every single sentence that comes from your head. A thought download is the tool that it's called in the life coaching world. You're gonna start writing down all of these thoughts and just write them till the timer goes off. And then you go back and take a look at them. And if there's any thought in there that you feel like is constricting you, that's taking what might be possible solutions, aspirations, or dreams, and it's putting them off the table as not possible. And then ask yourself, step 2, is that 100% true? And if it's not, and there are things that are, 2 plus 2 is 4. But if it's not 100% true, then ask yourself the third question, do I want to keep choosing to believe it? Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Ask Steadfast. Whit and I are super excited to use this avenue to sort of spread our message. And so it'd mean a ton to us if you'd subscribe to this channel. Additionally, if you have any questions you'd like to see addressed in future episodes, whether serious or funny, we'd love to see those in the comments. So leave that in the comment below, and we'll see you in the next one.